Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Peter Merry. I have actually been living here since 1999, and my Dutch is pretty good. My excuse for not speaking Dutch is that I can't say gepersonaliseerd more than once a day. So that's that. Really, my work is trying to help humanity through the current transition that we're in. And my work in education is dedicated to that as well. And that's what I want to focus on in the context of future-proof education and personalized learning. This quote kind of summarizes it for me. You may be familiar with it. Where your talents meet the needs of the world, therein lies your vocation. Your talents, needs of the world. Now, personalized education obviously often focuses on you and your talents. But a big question is, what kind of world are our kids, pupils, students coming into? If we don't understand the kind of world they're coming into, we can have it as personalized as we want, but they're not going to be able to survive and thrive through this process. So what I want to do first is sketch out for you how I see the state of the world now and what these kids are coming into. And then I'll tell you what we're doing with Ubiquity University to try and prepare them for it. So IBM, every couple of years, does a study of 1,700 leaders, CEOs in the world. The one word they came out with a couple of years ago was hypercomplexity. They all agreed hypercomplexity. What does that mean, hypercomplexity? I'll tell you what it means. It means they don't have a clue how to navigate this reality. Not just complex, but hypercomplex. All of these different issues that were gradually evolving over time are reaching a peak point now. And the education systems that we developed like way back here. No, we haven't got an education system that's fit for this reality right now yet. This is the world the kids are entering. It's a nice quote from Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut. Civilization is in a critical state. We're at an evolutionary crossroads. On the one hand, problems and conflicts have arisen which are global in scale and have brought society to a condition of escalating planetary crises. On the other hand, humankind's potentials for creative change, fulfillment, and benevolent control of our environment have never been greater. Two things, collapse and emergence at the same time. That's where we are right now. This is from Ervin Laszlo, Professor Ervin Laszlo, systems thinker, and what he's doing, take a big picture perspective here, is he shows the different evolutions that we've made as humanity over time, agrarian into agricultural, into feudal, into industrial, into post-industrial. And what you notice about these changes is that they are not linear changes. These are non-linear leaps. So as someone has said before, we're not in an era of change. We're in a change of eras. And we need to realize that because that's the world that the kids are coming into. We can't see the reality that's going to be there 20, 30, 40 years down the line. So how do you educate for it? In these kind of non-linear changes, what generally happens is, we emerge, we develop a bunch of solutions that work for a current reality. Those solutions work for a while, but those solutions have within them the seeds of the next set of problems. Solutions have the seeds of the next set of problems. We're now reaping the problems that were sown, let's say, around the Industrial Revolution. Now, what happens in these processes is at this point we begin to realize something is wrong. And innovators, such as probably a lot of people in this room, are trying to work out how on earth do we come up with something that's better than this. But until we're there, we have to hang out in what the systems thinkers call a chaos point. It's a point where we know the current system doesn't work, but we haven't yet got the new system in place. And that's a scary place to be for all of us, because we know it's not working, but we have to keep doing it until we've got something that does work. So that's where we're hanging out at the moment. How do you educate in this kind of a context? When you get these nonlinear changes, what happens is all these different issues come together. It's not just one or the other. And maybe you only see one on the front page of the paper, but they all interlock. and they feed off of each other, and they accelerate the change. And it requires a level of collaboration across boundaries that we've not had to engage with yet. This was Time magazine back in 2006. Right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take us through a short state of the world. It may not be comfortable, but don't try to grab it with your head, with your mind. Allow it to come in and just notice how your body-mind responds to it, okay? As Dr. Don Beck says, the best place to be in a crisis is the hard truth. And as these guys say, the purpose of facing the facts is not to wallow in anguish, but to inform the creative process so we can come up with solutions that have the maximum chance of solving the problems, no matter how bad they are. The worse the problem is, the more vitally important it is to know its real nature. So, climate change we're all familiar with. We are desperately inadequate in our response to climate change at the moment. You're probably all aware of that. 2 degrees, we'll be very lucky to keep ourselves at 2 degrees. We're likely to be pushing up to 3 or 4. We're reaping the benefits of that already, as we can see with the storm the other day. Or on the one coast of the US, you've got fires, the other coast you've got floods. So this stuff is real, and it's accelerating. We're kind of running out of oil. So we're trying to work out how we're going to kind of look after ourselves in the context of no oil, which on the one hand is good because we won't be burning fossil fuels. On the other hand, we need our energy from somewhere. And yet at the same time, there's a surge in renewable energy use. So what we're seeing is collapse of the old system and emergence of the new. Solar panels dropping massively in price, uptake huge, so breakthrough of something new. Electric cars, obviously on the rise, big time. Of course, depends how you charge them. Do you charge them with fossil fuels or do you charge them with solar? New solution. Problems, agriculture, United Nations. Potentially catastrophic impact on food production across the world. Shifting weather patterns mean less drinking water as well as less irrigation for farming. So the refugee crisis we experienced recently is the tip of the iceberg. What are people going to do when they run out of food and water? They're going to try to go somewhere. How are we going to deal with that? We've dealt pretty inadequately with the tip of the iceberg. How are we going to deal with the rest of the iceberg? At the same time, boom in organic solutions. Here's George Soros on economics. Unless fundamental reforms are implemented, the current system will continue on a spiral of crisis. Well, he should know. This is how a colleague of mine frames it. We've got the industrial paradigm now, and we're trying to work our way out of it. And he frames the alternative as what he calls the Gaian paradigm, but we're in that transition right now. You get solutions like this, cradle to cradle, been around ages now, at last kind of coming around as people talk about the circular economy, circular solutions. So within the stress context, new emergence. Economy shifting from, this is an example, from traditional rental over to sharing, the sharing economy. People saying, actually, I don't need to have all of this stuff. I can borrow it from a neighbor. Don't need to own it all. It's the younger generation who are moving into being sharers in the economy. So what does that mean for our economic development, the way we measure economic progress, if people stop buying stuff and start sharing it? I mean, that sounds like a good thing to me, but our current measurements are not going to value it very highly. Here's a great Dutch example, Peerby. Anybody on Peerby? Very good. So Peerby basically allows you to say, I don't own a chainsaw, but I really need one because my neighbor's getting a bit irritating or whatever. And so you say, I need a chainsaw, and it sends a message to everybody else on Peerby within a kilometer range around you saying, Peter needs a chainsaw. And somebody will ping back, say, hey, I've got a chainsaw, you can borrow my chainsaw. Not only does it enable the exchange, but it builds community resilience, because I get to meet somebody, they do something for me, I hand it back for them. So a great solution emerging. How about this, though? The average lifespan of the Standard & Poor 500 companies in the 1920s was 67 years. The average lifespan of the S&P 500 companies in 2015 is 15 years. So companies are coming and going far more quickly than they were. 10 years from now, more than 40% of today's top companies will no longer exist. By 2020, more than 3/4 of the S&P 500 will be companies we've never heard of yet. So how do we educate people for that? Population growth, here we go on the big curve. So we've got all these resource challenges, and yet population's going through the roof. This was last week when I was preparing the presentation, the latest count, and that day population globally had grown by over 107,000 people in one day. At the same time, there's increased risks as we globally are connecting to each other, people flying all over the place, spreading disease, pandemics, the bacteria are having a great time, and that's going to be our biggest challenge as we move forward. How are we going to deal with one of these massive health crises when they hit us? Mindsets, however, are also changing. From more traditional into the more modern, we could think like more scientific, rational focus, into what's being called the cultural creatives. And I don't have data since 2008, but it's an evolutionary process. So the cultural creatives are growing. They're more concerned about personal development, emotional intelligence, the environment, those kind of things. So that mindset's growing. And then you've got the latest breakthroughs in science, right, which are telling us that actually if you look at all this stuff that goes on, stock price, traffic, there's a pattern underneath it. There's actually a mathematical pattern underneath all of these things. I mean, if you were religious, you'd say it was God, but was it Einstein who was like, God is a mathematician? All these things are patterns. This isn't random. There are mathematical patterns under the stock price movements, internet, library book loans. Right, what does that mean for the nature of our reality? Princeton University spent 28 years studying how human intention affects otherwise random events on computers. What they did was they spent 28 years with computers generating zeros and ones to see if somebody tried to generate more ones just with their mind, without any physical contact with the computer, would it make a difference? Statistically significant difference. The chance of their findings being chance are 1 in a billion, because they had to do the research over and over again because nobody would believe them in their peer group. So what does that mean? Human intention affects events around us without any physical contact. And what's that telling us about the nature of our reality? Are we ready for that? And just to kind of nail it, a little clip from a film which, if I ever need to remind myself about a commitment to do something that's useful, The Age of Stupid, great film if you want to become aware of what's happening.
Species are now extinct, scientists estimate, and ecosystems are collapsing.
We have passed 2 degrees. We cannot now stop runaway climate change.
There are simply too many people to feed on Ireland's remaining farms.
Suicide rates increasing 800%. The Amazon rainforest is still burning.
And anyone who cannot bear to eat their own cats and dogs.
Entering the 8th World Food Crisis.
World temperatures today passing 4 degrees.
There's a large retaliatory nuclear strike on today.
Across the entire continent.
We wouldn't be the first life form to wipe itself out.
But what would be unique about ours is that we did it knowingly. I mean, what does that say about us? The question I've been asking is, why didn't we save ourselves when we had the chance? Is the answer because, on some level, we weren't sure if we were worth saving?
Chinese symbol for crisis. Danger and opportunity. Breakdown and breakthrough at the same time. So how do we make sure we put our attention on the opportunity? This is Paul Hawkins' work. What he did was he collected a list of all the organizations in the world that he could find who were working on solutions to all these kind of problems. And it's huge. He had to speed it up, and he was showing this at a conference, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So here is the emergence of people trying to find solutions to these problems, and whilst at the same time, the old system is collapsing, and that's what's hitting our news streams as we're confronted by that every day. So education for what? How do we educate in this context? This Pekana Institute framing, I think, is very useful. At one level, the old systems are collapsing. The question is, how do we help them die gracefully? How do we help the old systems collapse so they fertilize the soil for the new and don't toxify it? That means we have to honor the contribution the old system has made until now, and then help it let go. If you don't honor it, it'll sabotage the evolution of the next. So how do we help people do that? How do we create the conditions for new stuff to emerge, supporting the emergence, in a world where we can't predict what that's going to be? And once those examples are there, how do we offer the choice, the bridge across from the old to the new? So, where your talents meet the needs of the world, therein lies your vocation. We've looked at the needs of the world, so how have we at Ubiquity, in that context, attempted to design a learning system that will equip people to navigate that reality? You know, the data is in, right? We don't need to debate this anymore. The current education system is broken. The employers are saying they're not getting what they need. The students are saying they're not getting what they need. Something's rotten in the state of Denmark, as they would say. So 5 major gaps. The kind of education people are getting is not fit for the world. They're not equipping people to be able to deal with the complexity that we're facing now. There's not enough creativity, which is desperately needed to deal with that complexity. The skills aren't there for the new jobs that are coming out. And particularly in some contexts, people can't afford to go either. When we did this research for Ubiquity, we discovered that there were literally nearly 100 million kids a year coming out of secondary education globally per year, qualified to go to higher education but couldn't get in because of a lack of space. So how do you create a context for those people to be able to develop the skills and stuff that are necessary? These are the kind of skills that, you know, employers are saying they need: collaboration, communication, creativity, flexibility, systems thinking. Right? All things which are more than just your head, more than just cognitive skills. They're about the quality of the person. So at Ubiquity, we, inspired by Ken Wilber's Integral work, most translated American philosopher, if you've not looked at it, worth a look. How do we include both the inner qualities of people, professional skills, expertise, collaboration and communication competencies, and the ability, obviously, to get stuff done in the world? And that's how we translated it into this set of 9 core competencies that you can see there. I was very heartened when I saw this come out a couple of years ago, was it? Where they're talking about, you know, the need for personal development, as well as the basic knowledge, depth, and vakoverstijgend leren, so crossing the boundaries. I don't know what's happened to this or where it's going, but when I saw that, I was, well, that seems to be, you know, moving in the right direction. This is worth a look at. It came out last year. It's what a Gen Z design curriculum looks like for the future. Cross-curricular lessons help Gen Z develop the problem-solving skills they'll need in an ever-changing world for tomorrow's jobs. That's the kind of curriculum that we need. So, imperatives for humanity. New thinking, think in terms of interconnectedness, interdependence, and a framework of values that focuses in particular on cooperation and not just competition, and the tools for dealing with the major issues that we're facing. So, this is how we designed it at Ubiquity. When we were thinking about if we could start from scratch with higher education, how would we go about it? So we created a combination of academic study, right, the stuff we got to learn, critical thinking, etc. Self-mastery, essentially personal development, and action, hands-on action in the world, where they're really working on a project to try to make a positive difference. And they literally get 1/3 of their credits for each of those. 1/3 only for academic study, 1/3 for self-mastery, and 1/3 for their action in the world. And they do it in parallel. You don't wait till the end of the study to do your action, because all the research shows, in terms of cross-training, that they enhance each other. When you do them in parallel, they enhance each other. So looking at self-mastery, you know, probably a lot of you familiar with Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. How do you help people develop intelligences across the board? You know, not just the cognitive, logical, mathematical, but all of the intelligences, all the competencies, the qualities they're going to need to deal with this hyper-complex reality. I've been working with these people at Uzazu to try to frame what's a kind of holistic picture of a person. How can you help them see themselves through the many lenses that represent their reality, from self and empowerment, health and vitality, meaning and purpose. You know, it's about noticing that it's not just the mind that needs to work here, but how do we engage all different aspects of our lives? Focusing on these 4 areas is the way we've categorized them based on Wilber's work. Experience on the one hand, behaviors on the other, culture, interaction, relationship on the other, and then the roles that you play in the world on the other hand. So again, helping people tease these out and think through how they're showing up in these different contexts. And the UN has done a great job for us. You know, recently they come up with the Sustainable Development Goals, basically identified the challenges we face. So what we need to do is crack these, right? Crack these 17 goals. And so our whole curriculum is tied into the SDG framework. So you can see which of these are you developing competence in as you work through your program. The projects, the impact projects that they do are contributing to one or more of the SDGs. This is the solution framework. It may not be ideal, but it's the best we have and the best that we have global alignment behind at the moment. And UNESCO did a really great job where they pulled together, you can't read the detail, but they pulled together a set of cross-cutting SDG competencies. So these are competencies that you need to solve any of these major global challenges. And then they went and built competency sets for each of the SDGs, working with a bunch of partners, and they categorized those competency sets into cognitive, socio-emotional, self-mastery, and behavioral, action-driven. So there you've got a template, a great place to start in terms of how do we equip people to deal with the challenges that we're facing. So being Chief Innovation Officer, I get to play and dream about possible futures. And part of what I dream about is what we could be doing with virtual reality or augmented reality. And so I was thinking, what would a student habitat look like? Built this in Tilt Brush, which is great fun, by the way, if you ever have a chance. So over on the left, you've got like your different projects, worlds you could be going into. Just imagine if you're in AR, VR, you can literally reach out and pull yourself into that world and find out, wow, kind of quality education, what projects are going on there? I could be working on that. Who else is working on it? And then instead of university departments, we created guilds, which have different subjects. So the guilds are the areas you actually deepen your expertise in, because to solve any of these big problems on the other side, you're going to have multiple people from different guilds with different expertise to be able to crack the solution. And here's your avatar. Hopefully it'll be a bit more beautiful than that eventually. But there's your portfolio with all your badges, the competencies, the credits, the points, whatever it is that shows you where you are now. So ultimately, when somebody comes into the Ubiquity system, I guess there's 2 kind of questions I was thinking through here. One was, maybe it's, okay, if I've learned this, what are my possible pathways forward? What possible careers, whatever in the future? Or I now know what I want to do, what do I need to learn? And we need to be able to respond to either of those, right? And that pathway can be completely individual. They can be completely personalizing in the same way that you personalize your playlist of songs on iTunes or whatever, or Spotify. You can do the same now with your education process. We're working together with an Australian partner, Skillsbook, and they have 70,000 plus competencies in a database that they built with the Australian government that are stacked against credentials. So what that means is that you can say this credential basically equals this competency stack. Now when you look globally, those are basically the same competencies across countries for the same kind of credential. So that means someone can come into Ubiquity, start taking a few courses, demonstrating competencies, etc., and we can say, oh look, you're 30% towards this diploma in China, or this one in the US, or this degree over here. So suddenly you've got a global level of credentialing that hasn't existed before because we've kept it all to the national level and everything up until now. So it helps you to bridge your own personal pathway of the developments you experience in yourself with the possibility of getting the credential you need to be able to show up the way you want to show up in the world. So how do you go about, obviously there's tons of stuff behind this, but how do you go about, how are we going about assessment and competencies? We come up with 4 levels, essentially, of competence. So the initiate level is basically an understanding level. You can, assessment-wise, you can do that with quizzes and stuff, obviously, just about understanding. You know, we focus on collaboration. We encourage them to actually learn together and do their quizzes and things together, because that's how they actually learn the content, which is the end goal. At the apprentice level, it's about applying what you've learned to some kind of fictional context. So you're doing something with the knowledge you've learned. At that point, you're beyond MOOC quizzes and stuff. At that point, you have to be using what we call creative assignments. Those have got to be assessed in some way and at scale. The next we call visionary, which is your ability to take what you've learned and imagine what it means to apply that to the real world. So it could be like a project plan or something, some way of thinking through, okay, this is what I've learned, what are the implications for this context? And change maker is when you've demonstrated you can actually take what you've learned into the world and apply it effectively. So different levels of assessment depending on the level of competence, obviously, here. Accreditation. So if there's one block to innovation in education, I'm afraid it's the accreditation bodies globally, because they're there to kind of protect the old system. You know, Ubiquity was originally licensed in California. When we started developing what we were hearing was needed from the employers and from the students, building that out and putting stuff on the website, no, you can't do that. No, you can't have that on the website. And no, take that off, and take that off, and take that off. By the time we'd finished taking stuff off, there was nothing left that any employer or student was going to find any use. So we bailed out of the accreditation system in the US. At that point, the Steve Jobs quote was very relevant. And what we did was we focused on ensuring the quality of what we are delivering. And the main way we did that was through a UK-based organization called ASIC, the Accreditation Service for International Schools, Colleges and Universities. UK government approved for people working across borders. So when doing kind of distance learning across borders, they used ASIC to weed out degree mills. So they basically said, yes, you know, this is a good quality product that you guys have, and we signed up to a couple of other quality assurance bodies. To be able to, you know, because we also want to check from an external party, is what we're doing, does that make sense? The most exciting thing is, with this skills book partner and this set of competencies, we can start to say, hey, there's almost a global template for credentials that when you look across different countries, they're basically all the same. And at the moment, if you're a doctor educated in India and you go to the US, you have to start all over again with your education. They won't accept the transfer of your credits, which is nuts, right? So what we're starting to do with Skillsbook is enable people to be able to develop credentials that can be recognized globally, because basically when you look at the industry standards and things, they're the same. One of the most exciting projects at the moment that we're involved in is working with ISEC, which is the biggest student-run organization in the world. ISECers, some of you are probably familiar with them, they come into the organization, students, and what they do is they facilitate exchanges. So they make intercultural exchanges possible for students. They do about 500,000 a year, and they came out of this, it was after the Second World War it was set up. So these students come in, they do this work, a lot of it voluntary, and they only get paid if they move up to national or international level, and then a really minimum amount. But they have nothing to show for it at the end except a line on their CV. So what we will is, well, you know, in this work, you're developing and demonstrating competence. So let's find a way to be able to give you credits for the competencies that you're developing during your work as a volunteer, potentially in ISEC, in marketing or in sales or in partnerships or operations, whatever it is. And then we can give them a credential that is valid in the real world based on their work that they've done on the job at ISEC. And they potentially combine that with other courses. We can link it into the Sustainable Development Goal template, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there you start to see how you bridge in this context, the real life experience with the kind of theoretical study or the classroom-based study in this way, which of course this could be applied to any networks of young people in that way. Yeah, it's another one, as I dream about the future. Is anybody, how many people have been in a VR, probably quite a few by now actually, in a VR headset, in a Vive or an Oculus or a Gear? Oh, is that all? Wow. Oh, that's better. Good. My background's actually in experiential learning originally, and when I went on the Oculus for the first time, I realized, your whole body mind believes you're on that roller coaster. So here was a way to be able to take experiential learning into the virtual world and potentially globally. So that's something I'm really excited about, is how, as the technology evolves, it's going to be a couple of years, and then you tie that into blockchain technology and things, and you've got a really cool and effective learning system, because we know that experiential learning is more effective than purely cognitive, right? Ultimately, I see Ubiquity will end up being a platform, combining learning and training on the one hand, social innovation projects on the other, and then a community of people who are really committed to trying to deal with some of the issues, make a living, making a difference, as they say to us. And that they'll be learning with each other, they'll be collaborating, and it'll be a fluid system of learning, practice, testing things out, and getting credentials if you need them as you go along. All right, so last piece. Thank you. Well, what does it ask of us as educators in the world? So there's a big challenge I've kind of laid down. State of the world, big picture, what could we be doing? Well, you'll probably remember Indy and the Last Crusade. To me, that's what it feels like a lot of the time. Nobody's built the models for us to follow, except some prototypes. I'm sure we're all trying in our own ways, but we need more examples so we can throw that dust across the bridge and show others that there is actually a bridge from where we are now to where we can go. So for any of us, it requires boldness, courage, clarity of intention. People are going to think you're strange, but it's like when you hit a piano note. When you make that step, boom, not only does the bridge crystallize, but other people show up who say, yes, that's what I want to be doing as well. But they won't show up until you do it, because they're all in their little, nobody thinks like me, But when you do it, the others will show up as well. And at the same time, we've got to keep it light and playful, because we're building something that we can't predict. So it's got to be kind of design thinking, rapid prototyping, iteration, learning, trying it out, bringing the lessons in and evolving it bit by bit as we go. So that's what we've attempted to do with Transitions in Education, is build a community of people who can both have the expertise around innovation in education, but also, very importantly, understand transition processes. When I talk at the Hogeschool I was at recently, people get it and they're really excited about, the vision, but then when you start to try to work out, well, how do we move from here to there, there's like deathly silence. So we need to understand transition technology. There are ways to shift our cultures, our institutes to move in the right general direction, absolutely critical. All right, nearly there. How to prevent world catastrophe. It's a good place to finish, isn't it? 1, admit it could happen. 2, decide it will not happen. 3, commit your vision and energy to number 2, right? Without ever forgetting number 1. Here's a poem to finish us off from my brother, Tim. Are you ready? Are you ready to let go of this 20,000-year eddy, which we know is just an undertow? We be tuning into the real flow, here, now. You can't compute the impact of this Futureproof Education Institute. It's like taking off the mute on the voice of life, stepping onto the edge of the knife, a slice of how humans might be. Can you see what we've done? Can you see what we have begun? This the form which holds the storm. We feel the creature of learning burning. Invite the world in. It ain't no sin. She's turning at 40,000 miles an hour. That's a fact. That's power. The Big Bang rang, sang, echoing onto the mound, a blast from the past at last. Too much to count, the years of evolution, the earth, the human suffering and compassion. We're booming. That's a fusion of chaos and confusion, away from the illusion of wealth. Our revolution is coming with stealth. Can you see what we've done? Can you see what we have begun? Do we dare to share the future of how humans might be? Do we dare to be free? Do I dare to be me? To be fully human, love confusion, drop the illusion? Now we're booming. Do we dare to step into the places we most fear? Become clear, find a community. True to me? I'm not being cute. There's no parachute. We already jumped out the plane. Do we dare to become sane again? This ain't about brain. It's about living the future now. Yes is the answer to how. And we move in, and we groove in. But stop. Listen to me. Can you see what we've done? What we have begun? My sisters and brothers from other mothers, we are the ones where the ocean meets the shore. We're the ones we have been waiting for. Thank you.